June 2005, he attended another meeting that he thought was going to be a routine meeting, but actually this was something rather unusual, and he realized it was unusual as soon as he arrived. In fact, in his interview with us, the one which we have the transcript of, you will see that he says that he felt it was an accident that he was there. He shouldn't really have been there. He didn't know what was happening. And as such, he didn't really participate in the meeting. He was there as a little bit as a fly on the wall. He was just listening to what was happening. And at first he didn't even understand what was being discussed. Now, the people there were Masons. There were senior Masons. They were about 25 or 30 people there, including senior politicians who most people in the UK would recognise by name. I do not know who they were. He didn't name them, and I didn't ask them, but he said these are well-known names. The chief of police was there, representatives from the church, representatives from the military, 25 or 30 people. And as he listened to this story being discussed, it was an informal meeting. It wasn't like at a big table with kind of notepads and water glasses and minutes and an agenda and a chairman. There were just people in a room who were talking about all of this stuff. And what they were talking about was a plan that had clearly been made a long time ago. And what they were discussing was they were discussing the implementation of this plan. They were discussing how things were going, whether they were on track or not. And what, for example, to give a flavour of this, they were discussing between them some of the problems that they had in the implementation of their plan. And as this little presentation continues here, you'll realise what the plan was. And I'm going to be revealing this in very much the same way as it was revealed to our witness and as he revealed it to me, bit by bit, step by step. The first thing that he heard was they were talking about the fact that Israel didn't look as if it was getting prepared to attack Iran anytime soon. This was a problem. Even back in June 2005, they were apparently concerned that what it was that was planned on some kind of a timeline wasn't rolling out according to schedule, and this was an issue.
Israel and Iran are once again facing one another down. Blatant Israeli attacks on Iranian targets inside Syria are leaving some wondering what it would take for the two countries to go to war.
As we come on, President Trump has now addressed the nation about that major escalation in the conflict with Iran. The U.S. drone strike targeting an Iranian military chief minutes after he landed at the airport in Baghdad. General Qasem Soleimani, the architect of Iranian intelligence and military operations across the region for decades, a revered figure in Iran, today thousands mourning and protesting in Tehran. Iran's supreme leader vowing harsh retaliation and revenge for the death of the man he called a martyr. But President Trump blamed Soleimani for the killing of hundreds of Americans and claimed he was actively plotting to kill more when he was found and terminated. The president saying he did not order the strike to start a war with Iran, but to stop one. And yet tonight, some 3,500 more troops are being sent to the region and others put on alert.
There have been a number of indications that there are forces which are trying to push this into happening. You've only got to follow the news for the last 2 years to realize that the public is being prepared for a justification for this kind of thing. Iran is being set up as being the bad guys that deserve something to happen to them, and so on and so forth. That things are being set up in many of the Western countries for there to be heavy controls over populations, martial law, increased powers on security forces who are not just the army or the police, but in Britain, for example, our source said that he absolutely knew personally for a fact, that a very large number of private security people, their powers were being increased to give them the ability to arrest people, the ability to detain, the ability to handle riots in streets. And here we're talking about just regular people working in private security.
Let's take a look at what the police aren't doing well, siphon that money away, and put it into a service dedicated to responding in a way that really supports our communities where we need to.
Marginalized Canadians and activists say it's time to talk seriously about defunding police services. In the wake of protests against police violence in Canada and the United States, some Canadians say things like mental health calls, which police are increasingly taking on, are better handled by healthcare workers.
Why not take some money out of the police who are responding to those calls, create a new service that is an emergency service where people who are appropriately trained in the health and social needs of folks who are going through a mental health crisis show up, help with de-escalation, help with the treatment that those people need.
The proposal has gained steam after the death of Toronto woman Regis Korchinski-Paquette during a police call last week and the protests that followed. Defund the police has become a trending topic on Twitter.
Let's try to listen in for a second. Well, it's difficult to hear because she's pointing the loudspeaker the other way, but obviously there's a lot of anger here and frustration about what happened, as there have been at all of these rallies. That's why people are out here. They want to show, they want change. They're now chanting, defund the police.
And last year we heard President Obama talking about how he wanted to have a sort of national guard at home in America, ready to handle this kind of thing. The idea is that as the world looks upon this with horror, then they will demand from their governments that there are heavy controls over travel, over communication, over people who meet, over people who protest in the streets. They want to make sure that they don't have crazy bombers on aeroplanes, crazy bombers in the shopping malls. They want to make sure, and because people will be driven into fear by this, they'll request and demand and insist on heavy controls from their governments, which will be justified. And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries.
Patrol vehicles that is parked right behind it. So that's the fear here with these vehicle fires, is it could spread to some other nearby vehicles. Also a concern about that building that is nearby. And it appears as if there's some folks that are trying to... All right, it looks like there's some type of weapon there. We're going to break away from that shot there. I'm not sure who that person is, but obviously a very scary and fluid situation.
So tell me who you are.
Well, I mean, free Americans.
And what are you doing today?
We were out here yesterday too, down on the original protest site. So basically, you've seen the records that cops keep, and cops are a lot less likely to try and tread on people's rights when there's other armed Americans with them. So we figured it's about damn time that some, or at least I figure that it's about damn time some heavily armed rednecks stood with fellow citizens.
Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets.
It's intended as a justification. All of this is just the start of something, because this story gets much bigger, and it's pretty horrifying. And if watching this now you're feeling a little bit shocked, this is how I was feeling when I heard this information, And this is how our source was feeling when he was hearing this information in this meeting, because this is just the beginning. There are all kinds of heavy controls over populations everywhere. And then the next thing that happens in this chess game that's being played is that biological weapons are released on China.
I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths.
He heard this being discussed in this meeting. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population. It's racially targeted against the Chinese people. It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people. And these people in this meeting were laughing about this. They said, China will catch a cold. Those were their words. China will catch a cold. And they were laughing about the fact that these biological weapons will wreak havoc among the Chinese population. And after that, then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. Our source was not clear whether this was a Chinese retaliation or whether the thing would just spread out of control.
This is the story of how a virus we didn't even know existed 3 months ago has changed the way we live. COVID-19 has impacted life everywhere for billions of people. And it started here in China, in the city of Wuhan.
Spread out of control in the way that it would be very understandable if it did, whether it's racially targeted or not. These things actually mutate. There's a pandemic that really is sweeping across the world and really is killing people very visibly. And you've got this totalitarian military lockdown in all the governments in the Western world because everyone's going to be in panic about all of this.
Hey, Kaylee, thank you. On vaccines, in order to achieve herd immunity, you need about 80% of people to get this vaccine. Currently, only about 50% of Americans say they'll receive it. So will the administration make the vaccine mandatory?
So the vaccine, let me just note that we're working aggressively to get one, and we would like to get one by the end of the year. Everything does not depend on a vaccine. Vaccine's an important component of this, but there are also therapeutics. We're seeing there's not necessarily a tie to reopening and an increase in cases, so that's encouraging. And I would refer you further to Alex Azar, who's made extensive comments on a vaccine and the necessity.
It's clear if you guys will make it mandatory, if you'll use your federal powers, how you'll use them potentially to encourage people to get this vaccine, because if you don't have herd immunity, elderly people, compromised folks, they may not be able to go about their business again.
Yeah, I would have to talk to the president. I haven't talked to him about his views on making it mandatory or not, so I'd have to talk to him and get back to you on that. Yes.
Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population. People act like you have a choice.